maybe we'll entertain some questions of a non-cousin nature.
Yes,
but if your cousin
sir.
decides to ask them, that's fine.
Can you say no?
No.
You want Chairman Leach to demonstrate some...
No, you've got a good point. Go ahead.
Come on, Dr. Halsey, give him. What are you thinking?
No, he's cute.
Well,
this is good. This is good.
He was a Republican, and I thought that in order to be a Republican,
The
you
party's
had to say
no.
no.
Well, some of the time, that's the only answer.
Oh, okay.
Do you believe that the role of politics is to be affirmative or negative? Sometimes both.
Well, I think the wise public servant is positive and constructive, and a wise public servant should say no sometimes, and maybe more today than some other periods in time. But that doesn't mean that the saying of no is applied to extinction. I mean, and let me explain what I mean. I mean, you take a good social program that's doing a good public service. One could say, I am so socially concerned, I want to increase it 20%. And then what are the ramifications of that? On the other hand, someone else might say, it should go to 0. Well, maybe the best no is to hold it even. Maybe it's to possibly have to consider the awful thought of some quasi-across-the-board cutting. Or it might involve the alternatives that may or may not fit a particular group of people or situation to raise revenue flows. And so there are huge judgmental capacities.
I think you're extraordinary.
Oh, get out of here. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you are just such a gentleman, and we don't see any of this. I'm thinking of your party, the Republicans, who probably, unfortunately, will take over the House, and there's going to be none of the civility you were speaking of. There hasn't been in the past. They're going to have many more votes, and Mitch McConnell has said the only thing they really want to do in his job is to stop Obama at all costs. I don't see any civility in. I mean, he said that publicly. It's been all over the news. It's such a frightening thought that they would, with their leader, go into this new session with that in mind.
Well, I think the vocabulary of the country needs some looking at. I mean, it strikes me that in public life, if you're to say one absolute statement, it is that you want to do the best by the national interest. And if a Democratic member of Congress happens to suggest something that's pretty reasonable, one should give it a good, strong look. If a Republican member has an amendment, a Democrat ought to give it a strong look. And the idea that one is for or against something because another party might get credit, to me, is not a very compelling reason to be for or against something. But there is a mood in this country that is, it begins with the notion of partisanship rather than the notion of the American interest. Yes, ma'am.
Just to go back to the Endowment for Humanities, you mentioned that part of the problem of it is that there's this sectorialism by disciplines. What is the endowment doing to encourage interdisciplinary projects?
That's a good question. One of the new things and led in academia is more and more interdisciplinary approaches. We're giving this a lot of emphasis, particularly in what has become a new field, which involves what we call the digital humanities, where there are lots of capacities to bring history to archaeology to philosophy in ways that one can probe things. I mean, we can now with digital capacities, look at the evolution of the use of words in literature, the evolution of the use of words in history, and we can look at ancient temples and reconstruct them and get a sense of how people lived. But the intertwining of disciplines is becoming more and more important. And it takes people out of something that might be considered fact-driven history to the ideas of the time. And it involves kind of a sociology. One of the most interesting things the endowment has done, and this was several years back, was support some research about two towns in the Civil War. And the effect was to take a town in the south and a town in the north and see what happened to people. And the amount of disciplines that started to be applied to this were really rather extraordinary. And we looked at history kind of a long time kind of from the perspective of the leader instead of the effects on people. But there are just lots of ways to do interdisciplinary functions. And I'll give you just one minor example. We put out what are called RFPs, requests for proposals, in conjunction with the National Science Foundation, in conjunction with the Canadian equivalent of the NEH, and in conjunction with the British equivalent of the NEH. And we didn't even ask for a topic. We said we wanted people to come up with ideas of crossing disciplines and then involving more than one institution, involving more than one country. And so we came up with this incredible number of proposals we would never have thought of, in which a British university and an American university, a British historian, an American sociologist, and a Canadian scientist worked on. I mean, you just all of these interrelationships, and the intriguing aspect of each of these kinds of approaches was that they advanced knowledge in the field, but the methodologies could be used in other fields. And so we're really looking at scholarship in radically different ways.
Ma'am.
What is your contact with community colleges?
Well, we're having a great deal more. As you know, this year almost half the students in America in post-secondary education are in community colleges, and this is obviously for some reasons of cost, access, and if we look at the evolution of community colleges, and they're kind of some beginning evolutions around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, but they really got in terms of a kickstart around 1960, and there was a heavily, almost exclusive emphasis when most were created around vocations. And now community colleges are moving beyond vocations to a much greater extent, and we're trying to develop model approaches for humanities studies and looking at community colleges as a much more frequented way of entering at the end of the 2 years into a 4-year college environment or university environment. And the community college is doing the same thing. I gave a graduation address at our largest college in America, and which is kind of a trivia question. It's Miami-Dade College.
There are a lot of people who think it's this one.
I know. Well, this may be one of the largest universities. And Miami-Dade was simply a community college giving 2-year programs. Now it gives AA degrees, but it also gives BA degrees. And a number of community colleges are moving into the baccalaureate dimension as well. And then many states are passing laws that require state universities to accept community college credits. And so that you're having many more community college people move into the state universities.
And yet, community college graduation rates, in Texas at least, are abysmally low.
Well,
what do we do about that?
Well, that's a very serious concern. And in fact, the White House recently had a conference on just basically the subject. And part of it is to make sure people have access. Now, let me mention Miami-Dade. 70% of the students work at least 20 hours a week. 50% of the students work 40 plus hours a week. And so people are, really humping to be able to afford, but Pell Grant kinds of programs are cover much of the expense of a community college where they wouldn't cover near as great a percentage of the cost of the University of Texas. And so community colleges are points of access for many strapped families. And it also allows cost savings if a student lives at home.
So the NEH is paying more attention.
Well, we are. And in fact, we've changed some of our grant applications where it used to be community colleges would be thrown into the competition with all colleges and universities. And now we're kind of separating some fields out so that they go directly to a community college pool for applications. Now, I will tell you, we're not as big a player as we would like to be. Our budget just isn't that large to play a dramatic role.
Mr. Chairman, we're out of time, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I thank you very much for coming.
Well,
if there are
thank you.
other questions from the audience, perhaps still take a moment on the way out to visit.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming. Very well.